from the BBC World Service in association with ABC and All India Radio. This is Stumped.
Hello and welcome to Stumped, your intercontinental hit of news, features and debate from the quirky world of cricket. I'm Alison Mitchell in London, and not far from the magical arch of Wembley, as it happens. The country is football crazy at the moment, and you might remember hearing cries of cricket's coming home ringing around Lords in 2019 when England's men won the World Cup. Of course, England's women hold their World Cup in cricket as well. And what chances of England's men holding the European trophy for the very first time? It's a pretty exciting time around football, as well as cricket.
Yes, the footy's exciting, and there are all sorts of other sports being played. The Aussies are doing their bit on the golf course, maybe at Wimbledon, perhaps in the West Indies. But for those of us that live in Sydney, as I do, Jim Maxwell here in my sort of troglodyte restrained world of being in the cave, because that's all you can do until they get rid of this nasty COVID or get more vaccine, which seems to be slow in coming. But I got the heater on and I'm having a chat to you, and I think that'll warm me up, apart from looking at Charu, who I think is in a far warmer place than I am at the moment, and he looks pretty comfortable in his suite.
I certainly do, and I do not need a heater here in Colombo. Good to hear from you guys. Pretty much the same here, even though I'm in Sri Lanka. I'm under quarantine waiting for the Indian series to start here, the white ball series, which should be fun, even though Sri Lanka haven't quite looked like a decent opposition, certainly not in England. Maybe they'll be better off at home. But yes, I have shifted location from the southern coast of Sri Lanka, Bentota, to now the Gold Face Hotel, which is probably the most talked about, storied heritage hotel property east of the Suez, they say, back 154 years old. But I still can't leave my room. So we can see the ocean, which is only half a stone's throw away. But apart from that, well, just have to wait for the series to start. And yes, I mean, England finally seems to be getting something right in cricket and in football, Alison.
I'll tell you what, Charu, have a sundowner for me when they allow you to, and then a lovely stroll along Gullface Green of an evening. Love it down there. It gets lively, doesn't it, of an evening? There's food stalls and music stalls and, yeah, lots of people strolling around of an evening. England cricket at the moment, I mean, yes, they've got a lot right with winning the World Cup, but they have been struck by COVID big time. Because we're going to start with these unfortunate events around the England men's team, because they've had to replace their entire one-day squad for their ODI series against Pakistan after a coronavirus outbreak in the camp forced everyone, players and management, to isolate just a few days before the first game. 3 players, 4 backroom staff tested positive for COVID-19. And so England have gone into the series against Pakistan with an inexperienced 18-man replacement squad with players pulled left, right and centre hastily out of county matches. Just to say, from a health point of view, everyone in the squad has had at least 1 dose of vaccine. Believe some have had 2, but not all. And it's understood that of those who tested positive, some have had flu-like symptoms and some have been experiencing no symptoms at all. I mean, first of all, Jim and Charu, I mean, for those players suddenly thrust into the England one-day team, yes, Ben Stokes is captaining, but I mean, there's a whole bunch of players there who would never have imagined an England call-up by the end of this week. Well,
yeah, I always say this is a terrific opportunity for those who've been called up, because when it gets to the apex level, the top of the pyramid, there are a few that make it for long periods. But I mean, for me, I think it's a fantastic opportunity for those who have been selected, albeit out of the blue, to suddenly represent England, because those who take places somehow tend to stay there for very long periods. And I know that Pakistan are a very dangerous opponent. Will this make them more dangerous? It's debatable, because, as you may have alluded to earlier, they don't quite know much of their opposition at all. So maybe their stat boys need to quickly get together and say, oh, what are these guys doing now? What have they done so far?
Well, Jim, that's the funny thing about all this, isn't it? When you think about it from the Pakistan point of view, they would have done all their homework on the squad they're expecting to play. And then all of a sudden, just a few days before the first game, there's players who, there'll be very little homework done on them, and some players team who've never seen them play before.
Well, it could promote an upset. Who knows? I mean, I just watched Australia play rugby against a French team, which may have been somewhere between their second and third 15. And for 81 minutes, France were winning the game until Australia kicked a penalty at the death. So you're never too sure against opponents that you've not seen what's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, John Simpson is 32 years of age. He's the Middlesex keeper bat. Will Jacks is only 22, very exciting, aggressive batter. Phil Salt comes back. I mean, he's played lots of Big Bash. The Australian audience will be familiar with him, lots of T20. David Payne is another 30-year-old who suddenly gets, an opportunity after like more than 10 years playing in the county game. He's a left armer, so it's going to be fascinating to just follow this 3-match ODI series unfold. In terms of these positive COVID tests, we've heard from England's Director of Cricket, Ashley Giles, who says he's confident that, nobody associated with the squad had actually breached any of their protocols leading to a positive test. But, the fact is it could have been picked up from anywhere because there's not that strict bio-bubble environment that they had last year. The players aren't living on the grounds, hermetically kind of cut off from the rest of the world. I mean, yes, they've barely been allowed to leave their hotels, but they have been able to play golf, and they were allowed to do that last year. But I think they took a plane up to Durham, I believe, and a train back, for example, and they're sharing hotel space with the public. So it's not as if they're staying in hotels that are solely designated and booked out for the cricketers. So there is just a natural risk, but I believe that those measures have already tightened up. And some people have asked, well, how was it that the entire squad have had to isolate? And Giles said that, if it was 1 or 2 cases, then they probably could have contact traced and isolated individuals. But as soon as it got to 7, well, it was just too much. And, with the advice from medics, just had to shut the whole squad down. Charu, like the Indian team, the men's team are still in the country, aren't they? Waiting for the Test series to start. I mean, some of them were in the country, like holidaying after the World Test Championship. Has there been sort of much, concern about their health, like mixing with the public, for example, with so many cases rising as they have been?
Well, not overtly, not in the media, but one can imagine that the Indian team would be very concerned because, as you say, that if the players were, they're not completely free, but where is this infection picked up from? Where's the pandemic coming through? So I think the Indian team would also be worried all of a sudden, saying, well, should we quarantine ourselves tighter now? Because we certainly don't want a problem here. England, being in England, you could have a replacement very quickly, but if something happens to albeit large Indian squad, then they're not likely to get replacements quickly enough. And then, of course, the whole quarantine before that. So it's far more complex for India. And the other point, of course, Alison, I'd love to talk about now is what does England do in terms of the recovery of these people and the rest who are tested negative? This is uncharted territory.
Yeah, well, they have to do 10 days isolation. And I think that 10 days then will finish in time for the T20 series, for example. But from a cricketing point of view, what do you do then? Because do you thrust bowlers straight back into a series when they've only been able to do, essentially lockdown exercise? I mean, I don't know how many of them live on, acres of land where they could exercise at home. I think some have been able to leave the hotel and go home. India's women are also in the country at the moment as well, and they've still got T20s to play against England's women. So I think there'll, be a higher degree of caution, I'm sure, around all squads.
Also, just a quick word on Pakistan, because, they must have been looking forward to a really, nice, happy English tour because they've got a lot of support there, as you know, in many of the cities. And they must be thinking, the UK is sort of, fairly open, so we can go and meet everybody and meet all our friends and relatives, what have you. And they would be pretty spooked now with the positive cases in the English team and may now want to not be as loose and free as they may have thought. So that's also going to have a bearing on their mindset, where I'm sure they'll kind of, have lots of curbs put on the movement of the team, which is never good for morale, is it?
From the BBC World Service, this is Stumped on All India Radio.
Well, we've been speaking about COVID, and one player who understands the effects of COVID only too well is looking to light up the 100 in just a couple of weeks' time. The newest format of cricket makes its debut on the 21st of July at the Oval, having been one of the many sporting events that was postponed last year because of the pandemic. Both the men's and women's tournaments will run simultaneously, and this new format of the game will see each team bowling 100 balls to the opposition. Now, leg spinner Katie Levick hasn't had the ideal preparation that she was hoping for. The Northern Diamonds and Yorkshire bowler caught coronavirus last October and couldn't even walk down a flight of stairs without needing to take a breather. Her return to winter training was halted, and instead she was dealing with hospital appointments and heart tests. Well, let's speak to Katie to find out more. Katie, welcome to Stumped.
Thanks for having me. What an introduction. It sounds very dramatic.
Well, tell us a little bit more. So it's been quite a roller coaster. Just talk us through what happened last October.
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty, it all seemed to happen all at once. I got put in isolation due to being in close contact with a friend who tested positive. And then I thought I had phantom symptoms, and I thought, it's still in my head, I've dreamt it up now because I've been put in isolation, and then tested positive shortly after, and then very quickly went downhill and wasn't in a good state.
So what were those symptoms like, and what was, were there some scary moments where those effects became so bad that you thought, I don't know whether I'm actually going to be able to play cricket again?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, initially I just had the, no taste, no smell, no sense of appetite, and my main symptom was these like crippling headaches, like sort of migraines. And so I thought, right, these will pass, and these aren't going to affect cricket or my life or anything. It wasn't until in sort of December time, and I was allowed to return to training, that we realised how badly it was affecting my breathing and my heart. And I was wearing a heart monitor for everything. And there's a stage return for elite sport, and the first stage is doing a 10-minute walk, and I set off, and instantly my heart rate was 190 plus. At that stage, I thought, okay, this is not normal, and this hasn't happened to anyone else that I've seen coming back from it. So that was quite a scary moment, and I thought, okay, maybe this is just the first stage. As that went on for months, I thought, yeah, there's a very good chance here that I'm probably not going to be playing this year. And getting to the age I am in my career, I thought this might actually just be it in general.
So what was actually your first game back like for you, actually able to play again?
Yeah, it was pretty surreal. It ended up being the first game of the Rachel Hayhoe-Flint Trophy. We'd been working towards me getting back a couple of weeks earlier, and I'd had a setback in training literally the week I was supposed to come back and play a game, where I had this incident where I just couldn't breathe and got sent immediately for more hospital tests. And I thought, right, okay, now I am not coming back this season. I can't be, surely. And that was quite an emotional time for me. And so when I got the all clear again, and the 29th, and sat in the change rooms at Headingley, like, really quite emotional, actually, just start having a moment to myself thinking, okay, I've made it now, step one's done. Now you just have to try and perform on the pitch.
It's Jim Maxwell in Sydney, Katie. So just tell us, how are you feeling? Are you ready to go for the 100 tournament?
Absolutely. I feel like as much as my season was a long time coming, the 100 has been even more so. It's been 2 years we've been signed on for these teams in this competition, and seems to have come around really quickly, and not all quickly all at the same time. And it's just really excited to see how it's going to go. That platform that women's games never had before, playing alongside the men, having exactly the same profile, it's going to be massive for us, and just can't wait to get going.
We've been talking here on Stumped about how the pandemic has affected women's cricket. So how important is it for the game to have a tournament like this, and can it prove the critics wrong?
I mean, absolutely. I think a lot of the division in opinion has been aimed at the men's game. They don't realise how massive it is for the women's game. It's the first time ever we've been given this platform where exactly the same as the men, with the same team, same branding, same game days. And we're not just the support act on a game day before the men play at night in a completely different tournament. For the first time, boys and girls can go to a ground and they can be someone on that pitch when they grow up. And that's just going to be huge for us.
Katie, hi, this is Charu Sharma for All India Radio, currently in Colombo, though. It's been obviously a very tough journey for you, and quite remarkable that you're back and you're ready. But it's been said that you are one of the finest players in England to have, for the moment, not played for England. But a remarkable record and everything else. But do you think this tournament, therefore, can catapult you into finally, of course, getting the English cap?
I mean, I'm sure that quote comes from my mum and dad, but yeah, I've sort of come to peace now that international honours isn't really on my radar for my career. I have a full-time career separate of cricket, and I'm very happy and fulfilled in that. And I've got to a nice stage where now that the domestic setup's more professional, I can be really fulfilled in my cricket and play to a really high standard, and still have that platform, and hopefully get some honours that doesn't necessarily mean I have to wear an England badge to do that.
Katie, just finally, given the experience that you have had with COVID, do you think, how much awareness is there or otherwise around the impact of COVID on sportsmen and women? Because sometimes you hear it said, they're a young, fit sports person, they should be okay even if they test positive. Is there enough awareness that, it can affect anybody in any way?
No way at all. I mean, like you said, I was one of the people that sat watching the news saying, okay, my generation, I should be fine. I'm a sports person, I shouldn't have any of these symptoms. And then how it affected me was completely different to how it affected a teammate that also tested positive. And I think there is an underlying long COVID crisis, I think, potentially coming up, because the only reason we knew about my symptoms was because I was in an elite setup where I had access to these tests. And had it been a couple of years ago when I'm in an amateur setup, who knows what would have happened when I've returned to normal life. And I think they just need to be careful, and you can't be so blasé and think, it won't affect me, because the data shows it doesn't so far, because it is just so unruly in its rules and how it affects people. So I think that's there's probably a lot more stories still to come out about it.
Well, Katie, glad that you are fit and well and playing again. Can't wait to see you in the 100, not least. And yeah, we hope you stay that way. Good luck. And thanks so much for coming on Stumped.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
That is Katie Levick, leg spinner. We'll see her in action for the Northern Diamonds in the 100. Jim Charu, I mean, that was one thing which struck me from what Ashley Giles said about the test amongst the England men's camp, that, these guys are fit and healthy, they should be fine. And you think, well, you don't know that, do you?
Nothing's changed in 12 months. Can't take anything for granted with all this unpleasantness in our lives. It's there.
It seems very different for different people, doesn't it? Because people get affected, people are even asymptomatic, and sometimes they're declared positive and they don't feel a thing, and they get back very quickly to 100%. So it's very difficult to be collectively responsible in a team situation because people take it so differently and get affected so differently. It's not an easy challenge at all. And I just, for heaven's sake, enough now. I mean, we need to be COVID-free and get on with it, because it's been a year and a half or so, and we're all still, I certainly am, very confused about how it can happen and how we can get rid of it.
Certainly what Katie was saying there about the 100 and the impact it ought to have on the women's game, I think rings very true. And yeah, there's been so much investment put into it. And for the women, I think the impact of the 100 has a greater prospect of benefiting the women's game, like more so than the men's, because there's so much room for growth, isn't there, in the women's game, and they've never had. Well, that's all we've got time for this week on Stumped on All India Radio. My thanks to Charu Sharma, Jim Maxwell, and of course to you all for listening. And don't forget, you can keep in touch with the show during the week. We're at BBCWS Sport and use the hashtag BBC Stumped. In the meantime, stay safe and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining us.
If you're batting, watch the ball.
Stumped is a BBC sport production for the BBC World Service in association with the Australian Broadcasting Corporation and All India Radio.